Welcome to the video tutorials for the Thinking Math lessons for the Tees Valley project. The aim of this is to give you an introduction to the purpose of the videos. All of the lessons are very profitable for children's thinking, very profitable. And the aim of the video tutorials is so you can use the lessons to develop fruitful thinking in your children. You can use it to explore their thoughts and their ideas, to challenge them. The video tutorials themselves will give you an example of typical responses of the pupils, so you can probe and explore their ideas. It's how 11 and 12-year-olds think about the world rather than how we teach them mathematics. We want them to think for themselves. So all of the video tutorials will give you examples of pupils' work, will give you examples of key questions, of the typical things that pupils might say in response to the challenge. But the idea is that you can set up a dialogue with the pupils that will carry on beyond the lessons. So the video tutorials are there to support you to do that, so you can get to the heart of the lesson. So that when it's not about answering the questions, it's more about challenging your class and knowing the moves that might be involved in the lesson so that you can kind of prepare for them. So a lot of this happens in the lesson itself. So it's quite responsive, it's quite active. You've got to listen carefully to the pupils. So we hope that these video tutorials will prepare you for that. So when the pupils come in and the lesson starts, you can really challenge their thinking and just probe and just enjoy the thinking experience with the pupils. Hi, welcome to the video tutorial for the Thinking Math lesson Prediction and Correlation. What I'll do is I'll give you an overview of the lesson and then go into it in more depth, explaining the thinking, explaining the challenge, explaining why the lesson is so interesting. At the outset, I must say this is the lesson I find the most interesting, simply because of the way the pupils respond. At the start, many end of year 7 into year 8 pupils just sit and they do not know how to respond to the lesson. And I think that's quite important, that we're actually forcing them to make sense of data for themselves. There isn't an answer here, which is really quite challenging for the people. There isn't an answer. The class will reach a consensus, but it's absolutely fascinating to watch them struggle until the penny drops. It's really lovely when they start to see something and then describe that themselves. So the big focus in this lesson on oracy and reflecting upon the thinking. So the lesson is titled Prediction and Correlation, and it's based around the scenario of a family that opens a shop and looking at their profits and why the profits are changing from week to week and how we might describe that pattern. So the pupils simply have to fill in 5 sets of missing data, predicting what it might be, and then plot that as a graph and look for patterns in the graph. So it's quite a simple activity, one worksheet that the pupils fill in, but lots of discussion. That is then followed with an activity where they start to explore where correlation might exist between, say, maths and science grades, or other examples that you might have. So the purpose of this is to show you where the lesson is going, but there will come a point with your class where you can move in a direction that you feel is most profitable in response to how the pupils are thinking. There is a second activity that follows this up, where the pupils start to quantify correlation. So it's very simple in terms of its requirements, but it's actually quite interesting in its management. And I think it's because pupils have never ever been asked to make sense of data. I don't know about you, but many times in a year 7, a class will see a directly proportional relationship, such as Hooke's law in science, and they will describe it as a very strong positive correlation. And that's because all they're doing is just seeing the line that the ruler makes, and that becomes a positive correlation. They don't understand why we draw the line. They don't understand that you can have a spread of data, that graphs aren't just a line. So it's a very interesting lesson to probe pupils' thinking. There's quite an interesting structure to it. So it starts, that we put up, that starts with people looking at a new shop that a family are going to buy. One of the members of the family isn't that happy, so the discussion then links to people's own experiences of shops and the problems with profit, and actually what profit even means. So a lovely chance to bring in financial literacy and explore profit and actually the absurdity of having less than no money. I mean, for most adults, the reality is you exist most months with less than zero money. But how's that possible? So there's some really interesting little asides you can explore, drawing on the people's experiences. And I think it is important to understand that you can have a negative profit as well as a positive profit. And the fact that at the start of the business you might be losing money, but then you might gain money, and there might be constant fluctuations depending on the time of year, depending on crazes that come out, and different football cards and little figures that they can get from Japan. So it really does engage the pupils at the start, because you can draw out their understanding of what these terms, profit, loss, going into debt, actually means. So I'll show you the example of what the worksheet that the pupils have to fill in. So you can see what the pupils are required to do is they're given these values, but these values are missing. There's a graph at the side that they're asked to plot, which looks like that when they plot it. And as I said before, it's absolutely fascinating how many pupils just can't see any pattern in that, because the numbers are messy, the numbers aren't simple, because we're dealing with real life scenarios. It's really, I can't express how fascinating this activity is. There is a pause where you ask the pupils to think about what week 9 might look like. And this is where you bring in the issue of data, where you can have the term to be used, it comes in, I've used it more often in science, is stochastic variables, where you have a possible range of profit that it could be, but there is a most likely. So the lesson pauses, often when the pupils are really not sure what to do, where you ask them, for week 9 in the shop, let's have a look at week 9 again. So week 9 in the shop is here. You ask them to think, what might be, week 9 is here, what might be the maximum profit they could make? What could be the minimum profit they would make if they had a good week? But knowing that there's a visual trend that the pupils do pick up on. So there's a sense of they're trying to interpret and make sense of real data. We don't quantify that till the second activity, where they're looking at a line of best prediction rather than a line of best fit. So they then get a sense of, well, it could be here, but it's most likely to be in the middle. But what is interesting is when you have the range of pupils' responses, where some people's most maximum is some other people's minimum, and they start to make sense of this spread of data that spreads from the top here to the bottom, but it's got to be somewhere in the middle, and they get a sense of that there's this range of data that there could be. So at that point in the lesson, you ask the pupils to start drawing a graph, and these are the values that they know, so these are the points that they often plot, and you encourage them to put down what they think the pattern might be. And the typical responses you get are like this. Some will simply join the dots up and then just do that. Others will leave it blank. Others will carry the pattern on. But others will leave it blank and just look at the dots. Others will actually see the maximum and minimum values that it could be that you've introduced in week 9. And then others will draw some sort of shape around it. And it's really, really fascinating for pupils to get their heads around the fact that there might be 2 lines on a graph, a maximum line and minimum line, but we don't actually know what it is in the middle. So in many senses, we're introducing them to correlation as a model of data that allows them to sort of explore relations between variables. And there's a lot of common sense and estimating in here. It seems right. So because of this, the pupils sometimes will see graphs in a very, very different light, that there's meaning to the graphs. It isn't a line, it means something. It means that over time, the family are getting happier with the profit, even though from one week to the next they don't know what the profit is. And that kind of brings you to a key aspect of all of the thinking math lessons, which is typified here, which is this element of reflection and metacognition, where you're asking the pupils to think quite deeply about the lesson. What surprised them, what's made them think more, what's this like? So there's an element of connecting it to other areas. There's often things in the newspaper, on the television, that link to these lessons from real life that you can bring in. And I know I found it very, very helpful when I've done one of these lessons, if you use these reflective questions to get the pupils to write something in the book that I can then follow up and ask them a specific question or write a comment and set up a dialogue. So I hope this has given you some insights into the richness of this lesson so you can go and explore it with your pupils.